Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Rob Cowell and I'm president of the Canadian Institute of Food Science and Technology. And on behalf of CIFST and Food Canada, Canada's only national food and beverage processing magazine, welcome to Table Talks, where we bring you regular webinars that will give you access to some of the leaders in the food and beverage industry. If you haven't already, please visit our website for a list of upcoming webinars, which will continue weekly into July. If you are a member of CIFST, registration for the entire webinar series is free. Today's topic is Future of Food Manufacturing Post-COVID, the Long View, and our speaker is Brad McKay. But before we kick off today's session, I want to mention that if you have any questions, please write them in the question box, and I will moderate the questions at the end of our speaker and will attempt to answer before the end of the webinar. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker and my good friend. Brad McKay is former Chief Executive Officer of Healthcare Food Services, a leading Canadian marketer of nutritious prepared meals and for the healthcare food sector. Prior to this, he was Vice President Ingredients and Export for Parmalat Canada, and before that, he held progressively senior positions at Procter & Gamble, Kraft Nabisco, and Novartis Pharmaceuticals. Brad is currently a member of the Board of Directors of Food Processing Skills Canada and the Yves Landry Foundation. And interesting to know, Brad is also past president of CIFST. So please join me in welcoming Brad McKay.
Thanks, Rob, for that very kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody on the call. We're going to try to make the next hour interesting and informative, but I can't start without acknowledging two absolutely wonderful organizations. The first is Food Canada magazine, who have been a stalwart of the Canadian food industry. I've enjoyed sitting on their advisory board for many years, and without Food Canada, we would be a weaker industry in Canada. And a plug for CIFST, as Rob mentioned, yes, I was president a few years ago. I've enjoyed my time working on CIFST, and CIFST has been wonderful at putting me in touch with the worldwide version of CIFST called UFOST. CIFST enjoys great leadership from presidents like Rob, but also executive directors like Robin Flockton, Caroline Burrell, and our current superstar, Constance Wrigley-Thomas. So you should all be members of CIFST. If you're not, please join. And if you don't read Food Canada regularly, please do. It's a wonderful publication. So today we're going to talk about the future of food manufacturing in a post-COVID world, but I'm going to take the long view. I'm going to talk about the next 30 years of food manufacturing. But to do that with any kind of rigor, I think we need to be inspired by the words of Winston Churchill. The farther backward you can look, the farther forward you can see. So I'm going to, in this talk, take us backwards to give us some perspective to prepare us for looking forward. So before we start talking about food manufacturing, I think we should be talking about food itself. So many of you in this call are probably manufacturing oriented. Many of you were product development types, so you'll probably appreciate where food is going to go in the next 30 years. But if we, inspired by Churchill, if we take a look back, let's have a look way back to the beginning of time when the universe was created, about 13.6 billion years ago. Earth appeared about 4.5 billion years ago. And then about 3 billion years ago, we saw the presence of oxygen on the planet for the first time. It was created by cyanobacteria. So those bacteria continue to get busy and create more and more oxygen, so that by about the year minus 400 million, O2 levels had climbed north of 15%, and CO2 levels, carbon dioxide levels, had dropped below 1,000 parts per million. So remember that figure of 1,000 parts per million, because it'll come up later. It's about this time in our existence where trees first started to appear. We didn't have trees up until 400 million years ago, and land animals first appeared about this time. We see dinosaurs came and went, and the Himalayan mountains weren't formed until about 50 million years ago. It's interesting to reflect that at the time of the dinosaurs, that we often sort of romanticize in movies and in books, that we didn't have the continents as they exist today. In fact, all the continents were one landmass called Pangaea. So moving forward in time, after the Himalayas were formed, after rainforests first appeared, we had apes appear. So apes appeared on the planet about 30 million years ago, or minus 30 million years. And then moving forward, we appeared. Humans appeared about 2.5 million years ago. So we're a very recent addition to life on the planet. And that takes us to today. If we look forward, many people talk about this beginning. This is the beginning of the 6th mass extinction. I'm not sure if that's the case or not. A mass extinction, as you may be able to see by the bottom of the slide, really occurs when 50 to 90% of species are rendered extinct. So we've had 5 of those extinctions already. Every year, in a normal year, about 5 or 10% of species go extinct. So extinction isn't a new thing. It's just an ongoing practice of life on the planet. But if we look forward to where is the planet going, most scientists seem to think the sun has another 4.5 billion years to go, and therefore life on Earth has another 4.5 billion years to go. So we are, you might think of it, halfway through the lifespan, I should say, of the planet itself. But let's have a closer look at humans, okay? That's us. We appeared about 2.5 million years ago in Africa, and there were many different species of humans. The genus is called humans. The species are like us, Homo sapiens. We first started eating meat about 2 million years ago. So our carnivorous habits are deep in our genes. We started cooking that meat about 300,000 years ago. That's when we began to harness and control fire. And that was, you might argue, the beginning of food processing. But the fact that we could cook, denature meat gave us a couple of big advantages as a species. One is it cut down dramatically the amount of time that we had to chew. We would spend maybe an hour a day chewing our meat once it's been cooked, 3 meals, 20 minutes a meal. Prior to that, raw meat took us about 8 hours a day just to chew the meat. So with that added protein, our brains grew in size and we had more time available to do more value-added things. One of the things we did is travel. So if you can see on the chart, we began around minus 200,000. So that's us, Homo sapiens. That's the version of humans that we are. Around the year minus 70,000, we started to migrate north. So we migrated to Europe, then we migrated east through Asia, then across the Bering Strait to North America, through Central America and South America. So we were the only humans to leave Africa. So that today we are, many scientists think, maybe halfway through our lifespan as a species. Some think we have only another 200,000 years to go, which would give us 400,000 from appearance to extinction. Some scientists, like Stephen Hawking, think we only have 1,000 years to go if we don't do something dramatic about our performance on the planet. So as you can see, as we expanded across the globe, many other human species were rendered extinct. So they became extinct coincident with our expansion around the globe. So if we're going to continue to survive and grow as a species, our future is going to be in our hands. We're at the top of the food chain, so when we become extinct, it will probably because of our own doing. But there are 2 things that I think we need to do in order to ensure that our lifespan on this planet continues to grow and we continue to thrive. The first thing is we're going to have to develop respect for the planet. We consume far more resources than the planet can replenish, and it's not sustainable. Secondly, is we're going to have to develop respect for each other. We all came from Africa. We all started out black. As we expanded our territory to Europe, Asia, and places farther from the equator, our skin lightened in tone. As the melanin levels dropped in our skin, our lighter skin was able to absorb more vitamin D. So based on our living situation and our distance from the equator, we all developed different skin tones. So the archaic practice where one human would discriminate against another human on the basis of skin color simply just has to stop. And we may be at the point in our existence where we are putting an end to this terrible, terrible practice. So our future is in our hands, whether we survive as a species or not. So we're going to talk about food today, and we're going to talk about food production. And food production begins with agriculture. And agriculture started around minus 10,000. And it started in the Fertile Crescent, which is that part of the world in the Middle East stretching from Egypt up to Syria and back down through Iraq. So at the time, that was the richest, most fertile part of the planet, and where a lot of our intellectual advancements occurred. Today, that land is desert. Desert largely due to overconsumption. So a cautionary tale. But if you look at this chart, you can see how we developed different foods throughout our history. We developed dairy, yogurt, tea, sugar, coffee. We weren't using table forks until about the 1400s, and we didn't eat breakfast as a meal until about the 1500s. So on we move. But if you look at the blue line in the chart, it's a tracking of the population of humans on the planet. And you can see from about 1800 forward, our population has absolutely exploded on the planet. So there are more of us all the time, and we are living longer. So up until about the year 1000, we only lived to be about 25 years old. Then by about the 1600s, we'd lived to be 40 years. By the year 1900, we were living to be 50 years. So that's not long ago. Halfway through the past century, we were living to be 65 years of age. And now in developed nations, currently, we're living to be about 82 years old. So there's a lot of us, and we're living longer. So I just want to zoom in for a second on longevity as we talk about some of the things that we've outlived. So we've outlived pandemics like the Black Plague of the 1350s, where 50 million people died. We outlived the flu of 1918, so we're a resilient species for sure. But I want to zoom into longevity for just a second. I mean, I spent a few years providing food to the elderly in nursing homes and hospitals. And when you think about sort of where we've come from, it's pretty remarkable in terms of where we're heading. So up until 1900, our lifespan was 40 to 50 years. But in the last 120 years, we've taken that up to 82. And at current rates of growth, by the year 2100, we'll grow to be 100 years old. So from 1900 to 2100, so a span of only 200 years, we will have doubled our lifespan. So what does that mean to us as food professionals? Well, it's a very interesting conundrum that we have, because for humans, this growth in lifespan in the post-reproductive years is unique to us among primates. So if you look at the chart, you see the bar that is the chimpanzee. So chimpanzees live to be about 50 years old. And like humans, they have an infancy stage, juvenile stage, an adolescent stage, and a reproductive stage when they're adults and able to reproduce the next generation. And that's what our curve looked like in 1900, okay? Today, in the middle bar, we're growing to be age 80, and in the bar on the right, by the year 2100, we'll live to be the age of 100. But the first 50 years will be the way that evolution is familiar with us. The second 50 years, that is from the age 50 to 100, when we are in our post-reproductive years, that's brand new to us, right? We've had only a handful of generations since 1900, and evolution, I think, has no way of figuring out what nutritional needs we have. We know that estrogen and testosterone are needed for reproduction, but once we're no longer reproductive, what do we need those hormones for? And protein is important to our diets as we age as well. So the whole field of study, I think, is just beginning in terms of what nutrition do we need in the second half of our lives. So that means if we're developing food and we're thinking about food for the future, in the next 30 years, we're going to see the needs of the elderly becoming more important. They'll be 20% of our population in a few years' time, and the elderly needs will be more diverse and more prominent in our food society. The needs of all consumers in the next 30 years are becoming more diverse. We are currently 20% foreign born, so all these people bring different tastes and habits and preferences with them from where they grew up. People have a greater predominance of allergies and vocal attitude towards allergies and their own preferences. So it's becoming very fragmented in terms of how we supply food to people of the future. In the next 30 years, we'll see the end of family meal times, and we're seeing the beginning of that now, I should say. We're moving to snacking culture, 6 snacks a day instead of 3 meals. And we're seeing the rise of eating alone, right? So your phone becomes your lunchtime companion. So meal times are changing. Food isn't becoming as much a core of a social event as it's becoming more of just purely a nutritional event for us as we lead busier, more active lives. That's reflected in our homes as well. So in the next 30 years, we'll see the end of cooking at home and the end of the kitchen. I mean, I would predict in 30 years from now, a kitchen in a home will be as old-fashioned as a cigarette lighter is in an automobile today. So condos are being built now in Toronto. This one went up last year in 2019. They're being built without kitchens, okay? So there is no separate room called a kitchen or a dining room. What you've got is sort of a hole in the wall of cabinets that has a bar sink, a microwave, and a 2-burner hot plate. And they're largely for reheating meals, because where are we getting our meals? We're not cooking them from scratch. We're getting them from Uber Eats, DoorDash, Skip the Dishes. So we're moving to a very convenient-oriented society. And if we're manufacturing food for the future, we got to be thinking of how these meals are becoming individualized and tailored to one-person households and one-person consumption. The next 30 years, we'll see the end of meat. We're seeing the beginning of that now. Largely, the planet just can no longer substantiate and support raising animals to be harvested for feeding of humans. So we will have to move to plant-based or other alternatives to animal meat. And plastics are on their way out. I mean, plastic bags are already giving way to paper bags as we understand the damage that plastic is doing to the oceans around the planet. You will also see the end, I believe, of the sit-down restaurant and the rise of takeout and home delivery. So Starbucks announced in February, so pre-crisis, that they were opening their first takeout-only store, and that's part of a campaign to move more and more of their business to takeout. You would have all seen the announcement where they're closing 200 stores in Canada, but it was interesting in that same news article to learn that 80% of Starbucks sales are takeout. 80% are takeout. So why do they have a sitting area? Why is that important to their business model is a question they're asking themselves. On the right-hand side of the slide, you see the logo for DoorDash. DoorDash is much bigger in the States than they are in Canada, and they're developing their own ghost kitchen. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the ghost kitchen concept, where you only build or you only operate the back of house of a restaurant, and all you're doing is takeout orders for DoorDash, Uber Eats, and the rest of them. What DoorDash is doing is they're vertically integrating, and this is a warehouse in Southern California, and that they've taken over, and they just installed their own restaurant. So they are now the restaurant that makes the food, and they are now the delivery company that delivers the food. So DoorDash is becoming a restaurant itself. So I think COVID accelerated what's happening to sit-down restaurants. I mean, many of you might chuckle at Maxwell Smart and the cone of silence, but social distancing requirements, certainly in the foreseeable year or two, are going to make it very difficult for us to socialize in a restaurant environment. And I think the longer term trends are such that people are seeing eating as becoming more of a nutritional event than a social event. So we will find our socialization in different ways than restaurants, I would say, in the next 30 years. So that really takes us to a discussion of COVID, okay? And it's certainly the thing that we're all living with and wrestling with. So it's probably helpful to park for a second on where we are in the COVID crisis and what's it doing to the food industry in Canada and abroad. So these are charts current as of this morning that show the daily number of cases across a certain number of countries around the world. And I guess the message of the chart is we're not out of the woods by any means at this point. So we see the US, who had the biggest number of cases. The number of cases they peaked around day 30. Their cases have come down, but as they started to open their economy, those cases are creeping up again. We see Italy get a handle on their situation. Italy is at the bottom of the chart. It's like the dark blue color, and you can see it peak around day 30 and then subside over the next several months. So Italy seems to have gotten control of their situation. If you look at Iran, the line above it, they, like Italy, had a big surge of cases around day 30, had beaten it, they thought, by day 70, but it's come back again by day 100. So they are now in their second wave of the virus. And then we've got all these other countries, Brazil, India, Pakistan, who are still at the front end of their first wave. So on a global basis, this is by no means behind us. If you have a look at some countries that have done an exceptional job of attacking the virus, Australia is one of them. On the right-hand side, all those squigglies that you can't make any sense out of is a ranking of the 184 countries who've had a death from COVID at the top, and it's ranked by deaths per million. So at the top of the chart, again on the right-hand side, where you see those yellow lines, are the countries that have 4 or 5 deaths per million: Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, New Zealand, Australia. And typically what they've done is they've hit the virus hard. So Australia had their first case the same day we did, January 25th, but they hit it hard. They closed the borders, and in about a month, it was all over, right? You can see mid-March, it started to go up, and by mid-April, it's pretty much all done. So that has 3 advantages. One is it keeps the death rate low, so only 4 million died per million of population. It limits the impact on the economy because it's only a month of intense shutdown. And thirdly, it gets greater population compliance because it's only a month that you're asking people to comply with change in behavior. Canada's response is on this chart. So these are the number of cases we've had per day. Where we would rank is at the bottom of the chart, unfortunately. We've had 218 deaths per million, and we're in a group at the bottom with USA at 360, Italy at 570, UK at about 600. So the countries at the bottom had slower responses to the crisis, and it's gone out over 3-4 months now, right? Started mid-March, April, May, June. So we're in the middle of the 3rd month, and it's not completely gone yet. 3 implications: higher death count, bigger impact on the economy, and harder to maintain population compliance as we all get weary of isolation. So the good news is they are coming down in Canada. So that's good, okay? In wave 1, okay? The strength of our resolve varies by region. Nova Scotia is very representative of the East Coast, and you see the blue line at the bottom. They beat it quickly and kept it low. BC in green reacted quickly, kept it low. Alberta got a little out of control. Day 30, 35, 40. See Alberta in purple. It's going up, but they had it under control in about a month. But it's the 2 most populous provinces where we've had the biggest problem in Canada. So Quebec was our hotspot, and you can see cases per day rising, but coming back down. So they've got a nice sort of bell-shaped curve, if you will, that it's coming down, and it looks like they're going to be getting it under control. But Ontario, our most populous province, we've struggled to bring this thing under control. So our number of cases per day peaked around day 40, day 42, but only in the last few days have we made any serious, taken any serious ability to bring that count down. So what's it done to food? Okay, these charts admittedly are a bit dated because these, the information is changing pretty darn quickly. But these charts come from the U.S., who had a response much like ours in terms of the curve. So mid-March, we saw airlines, cruise ships, hotels just go kerplunk, just cratered. And any of you who supply hotels with food, cruise ships, or airlines, your business is dried up instantaneously. Those of you who are in the food service business and the supply restaurants, you've seen the similar cratering of their businesses. Fine dining was hit the hardest because it's virtually all dining room business. They were down like 90% versus baseline. Casual dining, fast casual, a little less impacted, but even fast food was down 25% during the crisis, as the loss of dining room business was greater than the gains they made in takeout. In terms of food, all of you on the call are in the food industry, I guess by definition. So you're supplying food to grocery stores. So we saw the huge spike in the second half of March. Remember the lineups at the grocery stores, the toilet paper shortages. That has settled down. And so we're now tracking at about roughly, if you can see the red line on the chart, roughly about 10% versus year baseline. Pardon me. And generally what's happening is that's volume that we're taking from restaurants that are no longer sort of in, pardon me, in business. The big winner in grocery has been home delivered groceries. You can see on this chart, there's a yellow line, which is meal kits, like Good Food and HelloFresh. They had a nice lift for about a month through to mid-April, went back to baseline. If you look at food delivery, that's the red line. It had been growing so nicely, got a real kick and keeps growing. So that's your Uber Eats and home delivered meals. But the big winner is the green line, like a 5-time increase in home delivered groceries. And interestingly enough, that in surveys taken last week, 39% of people say this was the first time they purchased groceries online. And of them, 81% said they're likely to continue. So online groceries, home delivered, is a big winner in the crisis. If we look at the supply chain from groceries out to the consumer, historically, I would say up to pre-COVID, you had 2 main channels to get your product from Food Co, that's you, through to the consumer, the house on the right. You could go through retail stores like Sobeys, and then shoppers would go to the store, or you could go to a restaurant distributing your product through somebody like Cisco or Gordon. Post-COVID, that's changed in a couple of ways. First of all, the direction of the arrow has changed. We're not getting food directly to the home. People can't get out. So home, meals are coming to the home. You've got retailers like Sobeys who've invested in a partnership with Ocado. Ocado is a UK-based direct-to-consumer grocery company who had about 4 warehouses in the UK. And then they expanded their business model and said, you know what, we really want to be a service for every other retailer in the world. So they've set up a warehouse in France. They've got 6 in the US with Kroger, and they've got 2 in Canada with Sobeys IGA. Sobeys is branded at Voila. There's this huge, monstrous warehouse north of Toronto and one just north of Montreal as well. And they automatically, using robotics, automatically gather all the groceries, package them up, and send them out to your home. Huge investment, like $95 million, but it's using automation to not use humans, so social distancing isn't an issue, to bag your groceries for you. Same thing's happening in restaurants. I mean, with the sudden drop in food service business, both Cisco and Gordon have had to pivot. Cisco here in Canada has home delivered groceries now. So they take all their products they would have supplied to a restaurant quality food is now being made available in a home delivery basis. So that's called Cisco at Home. And Gordon Food Service, the other major distributor in Canada, has a click and collect service. So you can order your groceries online at Gordon and then go to their warehouse and pick it up. In the States, Gordon has these stores. They have 175 of these stores. They're like a small Costco, if you will, and they go direct to home through Instacart. So new players, if you will, in the groceries to home business. The next one is called Grocery Neighbor. You might not be able to see all of the logo, but what a clever idea. A 53-foot trailer pulls into your neighborhood and you shop out of the trailer. So the store comes to you. We also have in the States Mercado, which is a home delivery grocery business. It's being delivered by DoorDash. You're seeing more of those hybrid operations. Here in Canada, there's a company called Live Fit that has prepared meals. They're now carrying groceries as well. So groceries are finding new ways of getting into the home. Panera Bread and Subway, again, faced with the dearth of walk-in customers, have had to pivot, and they're now selling their groceries, that is their ingredients, are being sold direct to consumers on a direct to home delivery basis. Lay's is getting into the act. So Lay's, you would have probably seen the announcement where they now have their website and they go direct to consumer with their snack food, okay? Bypass the retailer altogether. And the Beyond Meat and Impossible and Meatless Farm people are getting into the same direct to consumer business. So brands are now starting to go direct and skipping the retailer altogether, which puts the traditional online Goliaths, Amazon and Walmart, in an interesting position. So will retail continue to exist, or will we see it break up into pieces where individual brands are the ones that market directly to the consumer at home. So irrespective of how the food gets to your home, I think what you're going to see over the next 30 years is three broad trends. And we're going to find food will become individual, it'll become portable, and it'll become sustainable. It'll become individual because our needs are changing. We no longer eat together as a family. We eat separately, so our meals don't have to be the same. The meal can be whatever you want it to be. They'll be portable because we'll eat in our office. As you see on the right-hand side, KitchenMate is a technology that will cook your meal at the office. So they'll be, and they're based in Toronto. It'll be portable for wherever you are. And of course, it's going to have to be sustainable given what resources we have on the planet. And that trend will carry on for 300 years from now, where just like we saw in Star Trek, the meals are individual, they're portable, you can order one anywhere on the ship, and they're sustainable. You're creating food out of thin air. So that's where food's going. Let's have a talk about where food manufacturing is going in a post-COVID world. Again, I'll take a 30-year view going forward. And the encouraging news is that the future is bright for food manufacturing in Canada. It'll be digital and it'll be sustainable. So let me just take you through why those three things are true. Well, food manufacturing is the rock star of manufacturing in Canada. So all of you who manufacture food on this call, you should be proud that you work in an amazing industry. If you have a look at our economic performance, in the last 10 years, food manufacturing has grown 20%, which is faster than the economy as a whole and way faster than all manufacturing. In the previous recession, food manufacturing grew 2.6%, ahead of the economy, which shrank, and ahead of manufacturing overall, which shrank considerably. And even in the last 3 years, food manufacturing has grown 12%, which is twice the rate of growth of the overall Canadian economy. So we are, again, a superstar of manufacturing, and we produce about twice the food we consume. So one of our big advantages is that as you look around the world, most of the countries, and the biggest ones, are in a biological deficit. So this is a measure of the ecological footprint of domestic consumption. So if I look at the US, for example, the red line called ecological footprint is what is the economical resources needed to feed the nation, okay? And it's sunshine, it's acreage, it's a bunch of sort of large economic measures. If you look at biocapacity, is how much of that do we have in reserve? It keeps declining, okay, as we take more than we have. So these three big countries, US, China, and India, are in a deficit. They're on a track which is not sustainable. Canada, by contrast, is in surplus. So we have far more biocapacity in terms of light, water, land mass than we need to feed our domestic population. So that puts us in a very good position. In fact, if you look around the world, and if you look at this map of the world, we're one of the few countries who's in a position to become, as I call it, the next world superpower in food. So we have tremendous biological capacity. All of the countries in green are in surplus. The countries in red are in deficit, and the intensity of the color is the intensity of the surplus or deficit. So there's a lot of countries in Africa that are green, and it's not because they have a huge amount of capacity, it's just that their footprint is so small. They're undeveloped in developing economies. They haven't industrialized the way other countries have, so they're not much of a burden to the planet. The three countries who would have a chance at becoming the superpower in food would be us, Brazil, and Australia. Unfortunately, from Australia, they continue to see their environmental situation deteriorate. Droughts are a frequent occurrence, and Brazil is very close to the equator. They're going to see their environmental situation deteriorate as well. So that really leaves Canada in a beautiful position as having tremendous biological capacity to produce food. We have, as many of you might know, 20% of the global freshwater is in Canadian hands. Much of it is still bound as ice, but that is changing. And it's changing because of global warming, okay? So if you look at this chart, the blue chart, this is a chart of new arable land that will open up in the next 60 years, okay, due to global warming, which unfortunately is probably irreversible, at least over the next 60 years. So that dark blue area that you see sweeping across, sort of Western Quebec, Northern Ontario, and across the northern parts of the Western provinces and into the territories, that is about a 4 million square kilometer land area. For perspective, Canada as a nation occupies about 10 million square kilometers. So 4 out of 10, 40% of our land mass is going to be able to grow food. Today, only about 500,000 square kilometers can be used to grow food. So a tremendous growth in our ability to grow food, which could easily make us #1 in global food exports. We're currently #5 in the world. So I mentioned earlier that we produce twice as much food as we consume. So we produce a bag of groceries, we export a bag of groceries, so to speak. But if you had a focused strategy around a certain industry, you might be able to replicate what New Zealand has done. So this is a can of milk for some of you who don't know, but for every liter of milk consumed domestically, New Zealand exports 19, okay? They export 19 times what they consume, or their domestic consumption is only 5% of what their overall production is. They are a huge exporter of dairy. Anybody who works in the dairy industry understands how strong and powerful the New Zealanders are. One country alone, they're the #1 exporter, account for about 22% of world exports. So many people at this point in the talk say, well, Brad, what are we going to do about it? What can we do about it to make us the leader in food? Well, I think there's 4 things that we should be thinking about, those of us on the call who enjoy careers in food and plan futures in food. I think it starts with a bold vision, okay? So I'm rounding my numbers a bit, but we do about $100 billion a year in food, okay? About 50 is exported, 50 is consumed domestically. If we could quadruple that to 200 billion, that would make us #1 in the world, ahead of any other country in the world. So that's how big we need to be #1. And that's about $150 billion a year. That's a big number. Many of us probably don't, have a sense of what, how big that number is. So let me put it into perspective. So if you look at the sort of smaller type underneath in the chart there, let's look at Alberta oil sands, okay? We saw oil sands as a huge opportunity for Canada as a nation. We've invested more than $137 billion in the oil sands, and it currently generates averagely about 65 billion in revenue. We kick out about 1.3 billion barrels a year, and the past 20-year price has been about $50 a barrel. So here's an industry that's kicking out 65 billion in revenue, which has been a huge driver of our GDP and certainly the Western economies. But think of food. We could be like 2.5 times that impact, and we wouldn't need anywhere near 137 billion investment to get there. So how do we get there? Well, one thing I think we need to have is a standalone food leadership agency. So if you're familiar with Board Bia in Ireland, they represent all of the agricultural and food production industries, and they're really focused on exports and making Ireland the green production center for Europe. Or the Food Valley, which is based on the Silicon Valley model. It's in the Netherlands, and they organize research to drive forward Dutch technology. And to give you a sense of how these 2 countries are heavyweights in the world, Netherlands exports more than we do, okay? They have a land mass of 41,000 square kilometers. We have 10 million. So if you took Holland, you took Netherlands, and you put it in the southern 16th of Saskatchewan, that'd be the size of the Netherlands. It's about 100 kilometers high and about 400 kilometers wide. And all of that area, that's 1/16 the size of Saskatchewan, produces and exports more food than all of Canada. So it's a bit inspiring and embarrassing at the same time. So we need something that's focused on food technology and food exports more than the ministry structure that we have currently. The next thing we need is one world-class food research university. Based on international rankings, our strongest university in agriculture ranked at 17, and our strongest university ranked 18 in food science and technology is the University of Guelph. We have some others in the top 100, but University of Guelph is the only one that jumps into the top 50. But even being in the top 20, is good. It generates the ability to, to populate an industry with talented people, but it's not going to make you number one in the world, right? So if you look at Wageningen University in Wageningen, it's about an hour south of Amsterdam. It is ranked the number one food university in the world, okay, from little teeny Holland, right? And it generates technologies that make them a very rich nation. I mean, we're ranked 20 in the world with a GDP of about $52,000 per annum. But Netherlands is ranked 12th, so they're richer than we are. And little teeny Ireland is the 4th richest country in the world at $86,000 per capita. So we could make Canada a much richer nation with these investments. And fourthly is land use in the north. Land use, because we're going to be opening up the north to grow food, we have to respect our environmental concerns, indigenous concerns, of course, and remember about sovereignty. We have a land mass that's the size of Europe. We defend it with 68,000 soldiers. Europe has 1.8 million soldiers. So if we're going to defend the second largest land mass in the world, and if it's not going to be snowy wasteland and going to be productive farmland, then our military strategy and strategic thinking has to change as well. The second part of the future is that it's digital, okay? We're going digital because food is going individual, portable, and sustainable. Our supply chains are changing. They're becoming more diversified and shorter, both coming into the plant and going out of the plant to consumer. That means shorter production runs, greater variety of products, greater speed and versatility, greater resiliency to rapid change. And all of this need for flexibility will see costs rise a bit. And it will be done in an environment where outside of manufacturing, we're looking at how work may change. Remote work is growing and may stay. We're looking at situations where you may live, work, and shop all in the same area. We're looking at a 4-day work week and perhaps some innovations taking us to the point where we have to seriously think about a guaranteed annual income for people who are left behind in the technological race forward. So all of this complexity and change means that we need new ways of manufacturing. So we're using robots now. They're increasing in use in food manufacturing, and you're seeing the growth of cobots. Cobots are what you see in the bottom right, and they're collaborative robots that work with humans collaboratively. They're smaller, they're lighter, and if they bump into you, they won't kill you. We're looking at the growth of robots in food service. So Zoom Pizza in California makes pizza with robots, and on the right, you've got robotic salad assembly. So the machine is called Sally. It's by a company out of the US called Cobots. And salad bars are closed now, right? Because of COVID. Well, the future is probably, non-contact machine-made salads and smoothies, made machines as well. That's a company, Albert's, out of Europe. We're seeing drone delivery, which will increase because it's contactless. So that's the new paradigm that we're going to be looking at. And delivering our food to stores and to homes will change as well. We're seeing the growth, as you all are aware, of driverless vehicles. So Waymo is the autonomous version or subdivision of Alphabet. You will see them move from diesel to electric. So here's a Tesla truck. But also, as they move to driverless tractors, you won't need cabin space for the driver. So the trucks of the future are going to look like this. So that really leaves us with the thing that is going to have the biggest impact on manufacturing. That's artificial intelligence. So staff training, facial recognition will all be done by AI. All of this complexity, speed, nimbleness, we will need smarter and smarter computers working faster and faster to have our plants operate in a more automated, responsive, and nimble fashion. The future will be sustainable. That's the third element of the next 30 years of manufacturing. It's going to be sustainable because it's going to have to be. In the next 30 years, we'll see 2 billion people added to the population of the planet. GDP is rising, so all the countries are getting richer. As they get richer, they buy more food, so that increases food consumption. And the food that they buy is increasingly protein. And we all know protein consumes a disproportionate share of the planet's resources. Here's a chart that to me made the biggest impact, and I wanted to share it with you. It comes from Sapiens, written by Harari. If you take the weight of all of the humans on the planet, it's 300 million tons. If you take the weight of all the animals who are grown to feed us humans, it's 700 million tons. And if you look at all the animals in the wild, it's about 100 million tons. And these are animals about the size of a small chicken or larger is what he looked at. But it always wasn't the case. If you look back in time, using figures from The Economist last year, 100,000 years ago, it was all virtually wild animals. And humans were a very thin slice, depicted here in yellow. But in the last 100,000 years, and reflecting our global expansion and advancement of modern economies, we are now, the unit of measure here is gigatons of carbon, we are now taking up a large portion of the biomass on the planet. That's the yellow area. The orange area is the number of animals required, the mass of animals required to feed us. And look at what's happened to wild animals. So we've depressed the number of wild animals on the planet in a short 100,000 years, and look at the huge increase in the burden we placed on the planet. Now, all of us in food manufacturing are in a good position because we're in the position of converting the orange into food for the yellow. So we have a great opportunity, but a great responsibility to do that in an environmentally sensitive way. So as you look forward to the next 30 years of what food manufacturing is going to look like, I'll just touch on 4 things. 3 are inputs to your plant. 1 is the output of your plant. In terms of input to your plant, more and more of the meat you bring into your plant for processing will not be animal-based. It will be plant-based. It simply will have to. Now, the good news, of course, is plant proteins come from Western Canada. So there's a nice upside in terms of the whole switch as the world goes to plant-based from animal-based. Beyond plant-based is cultured meat. So these are cells grown in a lab and replicated. And it will probably overtake plant-based at some point in time because it has virtually no impact on the environment. If you listen to Richard Branson on the bottom left of the slide, he's an early investor in Memphis Meats, one of the leaders in the category. He says, I believe that in 30 years or so, we will no longer need to kill any animals, and that all meat will either be clean or plant-based, taste the same, and also be much healthier for everyone. So that's Richard's view of the next 30 years. There are Canadian companies that are in this space, like Appleton Meats and Future Fields, that are doing good work. Those of you in the dairy industry, change is happening. So this company out of the States, Perfect Day, has created an ice cream made with a lab-grown protein, so no cow involved. In fact, some researchers are thinking that the beef and the dairy industries will collapse in 11 years. I don't think 11 years is going to happen, but over time, you'll see beef shrink as an industry, and growing cattle for dairy will shrink as well. But it's not just meat, it's produce, right? So vertical farming is emerging as a technology that you should all be aware of. Good Leaf, just south of Guelph, has been a leader in this area. They have product on the market right now at retail. On the top left, you see an old underground tube in England. So they're using the subway, abandoned subway lines to grow food underneath ground level in London, England. And Sobeys and the Empire Group has introduced small vertical farms in their stores. So vertical farming is happening. What's neat about vertical farming is it can be located wherever you want it. It doesn't have to be in open farmland. It can be close to the urban population or close to a manufacturing or processing facility. Energy will change. So wind and solar are the renewables that are going to take off. We now have smart glass that generates electricity. So this is a solar panel that generates power, but is transparent and acts as a window. We see more and more companies getting their energy from renewables. You might ask, how do I, get my grid to move renewable? It's a little hard to move your grid, but one thing you can think of is getting your plant off the grid altogether. In Ontario, I was paying about 15 cents a kilowatt hour. 5 of that was the cost of generating the electricity. 10% was the cost of getting that power to my plant. You go off the grid, you save the 10 cents, and solar and wind are now at about the same operating cost as fossil fuels. Water into the plants. Nestle's been a big leader in their zero aqua plants or zero water plants. And so their milk powder plants now don't use any outside water. All the water they need for operations comes in the raw material, the milk itself. Fourthly is, what do our plants emit? Okay, what do they kick out? Well, they kick out CO2, and we need to make some dramatic changes. So in the future, you'll see plants move to zero carbon emissions. Why? Well, if you look at the environment today and the atmosphere that surrounds us, the air that we have to breathe, In the last 200 years, the CO2 levels have moved from a historical, you see the blue line on the chart, bounces around between say 200 and 300. It's now 417. And remember, early on in the talk, 1,000 parts per million is where it's difficult for us to breathe. So we are polluting the air that we need to breathe, and obviously we need to stop that. So the reason that it is becoming polluted is the generation of human generated CO2. So this chart shows you the CO2 that's being generated per annum, big lift since 1950. Now, the good news is in April, when COVID hit, we took our foot off the accelerator. And you'll recall pictures of Venice had blue water again. The air over Los Angeles was clean again, right? So in April of 2020, our CO2 emissions globally fell 17% versus a year ago. So we can have an impact on reducing CO2 emissions, but it doesn't have to be painful. If you look at the bottom of the chart, you see the yellow line there, that's Europe, European Union, and orange is the balance of Europe that's not in the EU. You can see how the yellow and the orange lines have come down over time, and they've still had robust economies over the last 20 years. Even the US, which is the blue area, has come down from 6 to 5 billion tons per year, and they've had a robust economy. So we can pull back on our CO2 emissions and still have viable, strong economies. And how do we do that? Well, we just convert our plants to zero emission. So as you can see in the headlines here, Norway has a zero emission cement plant. Panasonic makes batteries in a zero CO2 emission factory. Most companies, including Maple Leaf here in Canada, have committed to being carbon neutral companies, and Maple Leaf is already there. You can remove the carbon from the air near your factory. So that's the scrubbers you see in the bottom right corner there, using carbon dioxide to help grow vegetables. Or you can do it naturally. Every tree over its lifetime will consume about 2 tons of CO2, and every human on the planet over our lifetime generates about 400 tons of CO2. So just planting a tree helps in a modest way. So the future of manufacturing is going to be factories that look like this, okay? On the top left is a waste to energy plant in Europe that has a green roof. You can see the foliage there. In Netherlands, they're building industrial buildings that are blended into the landscape. Green roofs on the bottom left just generates more CO2 or consumes CO2, generates oxygen. And this is a parking lot in Singapore where the office and parking complex is built into a coordinated green event. So that's what factories that are being built today and tomorrow are going to look like going forward. So as we bring the talk to a conclusion and we ask ourselves, what is the future of food manufacturing post-COVID? Well, the future for us in Canada is bright. We can become the next superpower in food. The future is digital, that artificial intelligence will have the greatest impact on food manufacturing because of all of these other changes that are happening to the world around us. And thirdly, the future of manufacturing in Canada will be sustainable. We can feed the food without destroying the planet. And with that, I thank you for your very kind attention.
Thanks, Brad. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can, Rob.
You can. Good. Okay. I had a couple of issues with my audio side, but I want to thank you, and on behalf of the Canadian Institute of Food Science and Technology, that was an excellent and informative presentation. Before we wind up, we do have a couple of questions, and I think we have time for a couple. Yeah. The first question is from Joe Yoon. In the GTA is right now #2 in food manufacturing in North America. How can we make the University of Guelph even better, and what might be needed? I don't know if you can answer that.
Well, thanks, Joe. And certainly, I mean, no slag to any other universities that are doing great work in Canada. It'll largely come down to investment, okay? Because what you need to do is you need to invest in the labs that attract the best professors that do the best research, right? So it'll be about teaching is part of it, but a lot of it is going to be about the research. And there have been investments in Guelph, but to get what we need like a 10-fold increase. We need a dramatically huge investment, because what you're building is $150 billion new opportunity. So that's worth spending, 1, 2, 5, 10 billions at the front end. So it's a serious amount of money. Whether governments have the courage to raise it is one thing. Maybe we can raise it in other ways through the private sector or some other fashion. But huge, phenomenal, like doubling, tripling, quadrupling of budgets. That's the kind of monetary input you've got to put in into it, and you're creating technologies that either don't exist today or are vastly enhanced by Canadian know-how.
Yeah, absolutely. Big investments required, for sure.
Yeah.
Another question from Belinda. In Canada, plant protein manufacturers cannot keep up with volumes required for plant-based foods. Do you think that we will lose in the short term to supply from China? And how long would it take us to win this business back?
Oh, I mean, you're right, Belinda. I mean, I think, one of the sad things is the huge shadow that that China casts over the rest of the world. I talked about making University of Guelph the best university in food science technology. Well, if you look at the top 10, 5 of the top 10 are Chinese universities, right? So they're already there, So yeah, we may lose this swing, but we have to come back harder and stronger. It's just larger investments, building more plants, building more infrastructure. I think we know how to grow plant proteins, but it's just more foreign investment because the Canadian market, isn't always large enough. Bay Street isn't always large enough to generate the large volume of capital you need to catch up with the Chinese. But remember, we've got natural advantage. We have all this land that we have today, and we have all this land that we'll have tomorrow. So we have a huge advantage over the Chinese.
Right. Okay. Awesome. That's great. And so we'll wrap up. We don't have any more time for questions, but we did. A couple of people have asked whether this presentation is available in the future. It will be. We'll post that, and we will also. It is being recorded, so we'll be able to share that as well with everyone if you've missed this. Okay. So thanks again for an amazing presentation, Brad. As a reminder, we are hosting. Yeah. Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I just wanted to wrap up just to let everyone know that as a reminder, we're hosting webinars every Wednesday again, right through July. On June 24th, we have Dr. Simon Samoji, Errol Chair in the Business of Food at University of Guelph. And on July 8th, we have a panel discussion with food grads, an interactive platform for the industry to attract and retain people and careers in the food and beverage. And also on July 29th, we have Dr. Ricky Yada, Professor and Dean of the Faculty of Land and Food Systems at the University of British Columbia. So we are planning more webinars, and we're continually creating new content. So watch for more information about our webinars. And I want to thank all of you. Again, Brad, thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you, Rob.
I wish you all well.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks. You too. Thanks, Al.